government is proposing to remove the full licence practical test from the driver licensing system. What that means is, if it was to go through, July next year, drivers would need to sit the final test to graduate from their restricted to the full licence. The goal, according to Transport Minister Chris Bishop, is to make the process more accessible, efficient and affordable. Bishop proposed new safety measures alongside the idea of scrapping the test. These include requiring drivers on their restricted licence to keep a clean record, driving record, to progress to their full licence with a zero tolerance for any driving offence. Would that even be like a little speeding ticket? Halving the demerit threshold for learner and restricted drivers, meaning they can have their licence suspended if they reach 50 demerit points. Currently it's 100. And include a zero alcohol limit for learner and restricted drivers of any age. Simon Douglas is Chief Policy and Advocacy Officer at the AA. And Simon joins me now. Good afternoon.
Kia ora, Leah. How are you?
I'm good, Simon. You've said the restricted test is the harder one at the moment, and the full test concentrates more on hazard awareness and is a shorter test. So do you think then it's a smart move to scrap it?
Yes and no. Look, we've done some research through our AA Research Foundation in overseas countries that we often compare ourselves to, and a number of those don't have a full licence test. So it's perfectly possible to run a system without the full test. However, in all of those countries, they had much tougher restrictions around the learner and the restricted phase with a goal of making learner drivers better. So if we're going to remove the full licence test, we must make some changes to the learners and restricted. And I think just listening to you talking about the three things the government said that they want to do to stiffen it up, we want more. So we think they need to do more at the learner and restricted phase in order to protect or increase the safety outcomes that you get if you remove the full test.
So what's AA's suggestion then if you want to make it tighten it up before we get there?
Well, the three key things that we will be asking to see, and we've already put in our submission, and really importantly, Minister Bishop said he's open to listening to people's suggestions, so we're hoping, and we're sure he will hold true to form on that. We would like to see the learner licence period extended from 6 months as it is now to 12 months, giving learners twice as much time in a car with an experienced driver to help learn all of those skills. As part of that, we'd like to see them log a minimum of 60 hours of supervised driver practice. And that is not saying with a professional, but with somebody who's qualified as a supervisor, which is anyone that's got 2 years or more on their full licence. And we would like to see professional driving lessons incentivised as part of that. So if you do a 1 hour with a driving instructor, it counts for 2 or 3 of those restricted or those logged hours. So those are probably the key things that we think need to happen. And all of those happen in many of the jurisdictions we looked at overseas.
I mean, things about this, I don't really have much to say about the extending the learner licence period. I don't think that's unreasonable. The 60 hours of log driving, as you've said, it doesn't have to be with a driving instructor, but I could be considered. I could go driving with a learner, right? Because I've been driving for a million years. But my only thing there is, I think, I might have some bad habits myself. How am I qualified? I just don't know if that's. You can get your old neighbour to sit in the car while you drive around the block with them.
Yep, absolutely. Look, all of us have developed some bad habits. And, if you're going to be a mentor or, take your kids or the young person through the system, it's not a bad idea to brush up on the road code, have a look at some of the information on the government's Drive website to remind you of some of those good habits. But the key thing about young drivers is their situational awareness, their risk assessment, their impulsiveness. And that's what a second mature head and set of eyes in the car is primarily about. And we see that because right now, when young people go from their learners phase and they get their restricted licence and they lose that second set of eyes, That's the time you're at highest risk on the road, and the death and serious injuries risk is higher when you've just got your restricted than at any other stage in your driving lifetime, because you lose that kind of mature second set of eyes. Young drivers concentrate so hard on the steering wheel and getting the brake and the accelerator right and all those kind of functional things. They need that kind of scanning ahead of a second set of eyes. So somebody who's been on their full license for 2 years provides that safety.
And the other one, the incentivized professional driving lessons or defensive driving courses. If you did that, it can take off some of the hours required. I get that,
Yes.
and I think it's a good idea in general. But for those that just can't afford, to put for their kids to do that, is that a little unfair that they're going to have to wait a little bit longer when you've got families that might be able to afford to clock up some professional driving lessons where others can't?
Yeah, look, yeah. I mean, there's an equity and access angle to pretty much anything. Look, at the very tough end of the spectrum, we know there are children in New Zealand or young people that don't have access to a warranted and registered car. Somebody with a full driver's license who can do that. We are very supportive of a number of the community programs that are funded through the government to help mix young drivers and mentors with cars and community-run organisations to really help with that. And a number of those courses do have access to driving instructors. So there's at the sort of the really tough end of the market, we think the government's got a role to continue to help fund those community programs. Nothing in our policy, nothing in our position says that you must do a professional driver lesson. So you still get the benefit of 60 hours with an experienced driver, be that a parent or a guardian, and get the growth that you can get as a young driver from that.
What about, I've always thought, Simon, too, what about real life experience, i.e. to prove maybe it's wrapped up in the 60 hours that, you've driven on, on a highway in the rain, or you've gone, between a city to a 3-hour drive down the country. I mean, that's your really driving skills needed for long distance. I mean, do we ever look at that? Night driving, stuff like that.
Yeah, there are certain aspects of the driving test that try and make sure that you encounter, some motorway travel,
bad weather,
intersections, roundabouts, things like that. Bad weather's a pretty difficult one because you have to be driving.
We've got to wait till there's a storm and put them out in it.
Yeah, exactly. So you send all the kids out on the flooding roads. That's not going to really work for you.